The sea churned with the violence of a storm, waves crashing like the hands of gods furious at being ignored. The winds tore at the sails of the longship, its black flag whipping against the bitter gusts. The ship creaked under the strain, the wood groaning like the bodies of the warriors aboard. On the edge of the boat stood a boy, no older than 17, his face sharp as a knife, lips pressed in a grim line. His name was Varan, son of Odin. Or so he liked to claim, though his bloodline was anything but divine. The boy's eyes, pale as ice, scanned the horizon where dark clouds churned with the promise of ruin. His father, a towering man of war named Halgrim, stood beside him, eyes steely with a lifetime's worth of storms. "You're not a child anymore, Varan," Halgrim grunted, his voice rough as gravel. "The men need you. The gods won't save you, only steel can." Varan nodded, his fingers brushing the hilt of his sword. He was small for a warrior, but his speed had made him a dangerous foe in the past. His eyes, however, often betrayed him, too distant, too cold. He had never quite belonged, even among the fiercest warriors. "Will we win, father?" Varan asked quietly, his voice cutting through the wind. Halgrim's lips twitched into something that resembled a smirk. "Win?" he repeated, voice thick with amusement. "We don't fight to win. We fight to take what's ours." Ahead of them, the coast of the northern kingdom emerged from the mist, jagged cliffs towering over the crashing waves. The land seemed as unforgiving as the storm itself, a land where only the strong survived. "We'll raid the kingdom of Frian," Halgrim said, his tone brooking no argument. "And when we return, your name will be sung by skalds." Varan had heard that before. His father was a man of conquest, always seeking greater glory. But at what cost? Was it worth shedding blood for a name? Varan wondered, his mind drifting to something deeper, something he couldn't yet put into words. But at what cost? As the longship reached the rocky shore, the men disembarked, their boots sinking into the wet, frozen earth. Varan's heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. His father strode ahead, a wall of strength, while Varan lagged behind, eyes scanning the desolate land. The village of Frian lay in the distance, smoke curling from chimneys, people going about their simple lives. Unbeknownst to them, death was creeping toward their doorstep, as silent as the shadows themselves. Varan's hand tightened around his sword, his pulse quickening. He wanted to prove himself. He needed to prove himself, not to his father, but to the world, to the gods, to the ghosts that haunted his dreams. As the warriors marched forward, Varan found his gaze drawn to a figure standing at the edge of the village. It was a woman, cloaked in tattered furs, her face obscured by the hood. She stood still, like a statue carved from the earth itself, her eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce the very soul. "Do you see her?" Varan whispered, his voice tinged with unease. His father gave him a sidelong glance, his eyes narrowing. "Don't be foolish. She's just a peasant. Focus on the task at hand." But Varan couldn't look away. There was something about her, something otherworldly. A sense of fate hung in the air, thick and oppressive, like a weight that threatened to crush him. The village was silent as the warriors surged forward, their boots crushing the frozen ground beneath them. The women and children screamed as they were dragged from their homes, their bodies trembling with fear. The men fought, but it was no use. They were outnumbered and outclassed by the bloodlust of the raiders. Varan moved through the chaos like a shadow, his blade flashing in the firelight as he struck down anyone who crossed his path. His movements were fluid, instinctive, as if the blood of warriors past flowed through him, guiding his hand. But in the midst of the carnage, he could still see her, the woman from the edge of the village. She had not moved. She hadn't flinched as her village burned around her. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The screams, the blood, the fire, it was as though they were in a different world entirely. And then, as quickly as it had come, the feeling was gone. As the last of the villagers were rounded up, Varan approached his father, his heart still racing, the feeling of unease gnawing at him. Halgrim stood tall, his face covered in blood and sweat, a fierce grin plastered across his features. "We've won," he said, his voice a low growl. "The village is ours." Varan nodded absently, his eyes still on the woman. She had disappeared. "Father," Varan spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his confusion, "there was someone. A woman. She wasn't like the others." Halgrim gave him a look that could have frozen the sun. "Don't waste your time on ghost stories, boy. We're here for treasure, not myths." But Varan could feel it. Something about that woman had unsettled him, deep in his bones. And he knew, for reasons he could not explain, that this raid would mark the beginning of something far darker than even his father understood. Days passed in a blur of plunder and celebration. The men drank and sang, the spoils of war piling higher than the bodies they'd left behind. Yet Varan's mind could not rest. Every night, as he lay beneath the cold stars, his thoughts returned to the woman. It wasn't just her eyes, it was the way she seemed to know him, the way she looked through him as if she could see the darkness inside. He couldn't shake the feeling that their fates were somehow tied. One night, after the fires had died down and the men slept, Varan slipped away from camp. He knew it was foolish, but something called to him, a need to understand. He made his way back to the village, the wreckage of it still smoldering, the stench of burning wood thick in the air. He crept through the ruined homes, his footsteps soft on the frozen earth. There, at the edge of the village, he saw her again. She stood as still as ever, her cloak fluttering in the breeze. She hadn't moved since the raid. Varan hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "Who are you?" he called, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. "I am the voice of the land," she said, her voice calm, but carrying an otherworldly weight. "I am the keeper of its wrath, and you are the one who has brought it to life." Varan took a step back, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" She took a slow step toward him. "The gods do not favor the bloodshed you bring, boy. You have made a choice, but there are consequences to every action." The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a chilling warning that sent shivers down Varan's spine. The night felt colder, darker, as if the very land itself was alive, watching him, waiting for him to understand. "What will happen now?" Varan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes glowed brighter, a fire burning behind them. "The price of glory is never paid in gold, Varan. It is paid in blood, and the land will demand its due." Varan staggered back, a chill clawing through his chest despite the thick leathers he wore. The woman, no, the spirit, had vanished as if the mist had swallowed her whole. He stood alone in the ruins, the embers of the burned village glowing faintly like dying stars in a gray sky. He didn't return to camp right away. Instead, he wandered, feet crunching over frostbitten ground, eyes blank as snow fell softly around him. Her words echoed in his mind. The land will demand its due. By the time he returned, dawn had begun to bleed across the horizon, casting the frozen coast in hues of fire and sorrow. The warriors were just beginning to stir. He slid into camp unnoticed, face blank, body numb. But the land hadn't waited. That very night, the first man fell ill. It began with a fever that burned hotter than a forge, followed by black rashes that spread like ink beneath the skin. Then came the bleeding. Eyes, nose, mouth. One by one, the warriors began to collapse, their strength drained as if something ancient had reached out and gripped their hearts. Halgrim raged, refusing to believe it was anything but the cold or weak blood. "They were not meant to wear steel," he growled. "The gods test us. We are warriors. We will survive." But even the strongest among them, men who had stood tall in the fiercest battles, began to wither. Varan watched, silent, haunted. He knew. He knew the sickness was no natural thing. The land was striking back. By the third night, the once boisterous camp had fallen quiet, broken by the groans of the dying and the crackle of fire. Varan sat beside one of the flames, staring into it as if searching for answers he feared to find. "You saw something, didn't you?" came a voice behind him. Varan turned. It was Istrid, a shield maiden who had sailed with his father for years. She was tall, with hair like raven feathers, and eyes sharp enough to slice truth from lies. Her arms were crossed, but there was no threat in her stance, only concern. "I saw her," Varan said, "the one I spoke of, the one no one else saw." Istrid crouched beside him. "Tell me." And so he did. Of the woman cloaked in tattered furs, the glowing eyes, the warning. Istrid listened without mocking, nodding slowly. "My grandmother used to tell stories of the land spirits, guardians of the old ways. It is said they wake only when balance is broken." Varan frowned. "We've raided before, taken villages, burned them. Why now?" "Maybe it was never supposed to be us," Istrid said, eyes narrowing. Maybe this land, it remembers, and it doesn't forgive. Before they could speak further, a scream tore through the night. They rushed toward it, weapons drawn. It came from the edge of camp, where a young warrior named Edric lay writhing on the ground. His skin had turned a deathly gray, and from his mouth spilled not blood, but ice. Frost formed around his lips, his chest heaving as if the cold itself were trying to escape him. And then he stopped moving, dead, frozen from the inside out. Istrid fell to her knees, crossing herself. "This is no illness," she whispered. "This is a curse." Halgrim stood over them, his face twisted in disbelief. "We leave at dawn," he barked. "We'll sail from this cursed shore and never look back." But when dawn came, the sea had turned to glass. Not frozen. Solid. The ocean itself had turned to black stone, as if the gods had pressed their palm against the horizon and locked them in place. "We can't sail on that," one of the men whispered, stepping back in fear. "No wind, no water, just death," said another. Halgrim tried to rally them, but his voice no longer held the strength it once did. Varan stepped away from the group, heading toward the cliffs overlooking the sea. She was there again, the woman, waiting. This time, Varan didn't hesitate. He walked to her, slow and steady, his breath misting in the cold. "You said the land would demand its due," he said. "Is this what you meant?" She turned, face no longer hidden. She was young, no older than he was, but her eyes held centuries. Pain, fury, judgment. "You desecrated sacred soil," she said. "You took what was not yours. You spilled innocent blood in a place where the earth remembers." "Then punish me," Varan said. "Let the others go." Her eyes softened. "You were the only one who saw me, the only one who listened. You are not like them, Varan," he swallowed. "Then what must I do?" She extended a hand. "Come with me." He hesitated, glancing back at the camp, at the dying men, at the father who had never believed in ghosts, only in steel. Then he took her hand, and the world changed. The wind howled around them as they descended into the earth, through a passage beneath the cliffs where roots hung like tendrils and the stone walls pulsed with a faint blue light. Time bent in that place. Varan could feel it. His breath slowed, his thoughts became weightless. "What is this place?" he asked. "It is called Vaelgard," she said, "where the land keeps its memories." They emerged into a chamber vast and luminous, a glowing pool at its center. Reflections danced across the surface, showing scenes of battle, of bloodshed, of laughter and sorrow, of the village before it burned, and of the woman herself. "You were one of them," Varan realized. "That village, you lived there." She nodded. "I was to be their seer, their voice to the spirits, but they came before I was ready, your father's men." Varan felt shame burn his throat. I didn't know. No one did, until now." She turned to him. "If you truly wish to atone, there is a way, but it is not easy." "Tell me," he said. "You must take the wrath into yourself, become its vessel. You must carry the burden of all the lives lost, and in return, the land may be healed." Varan stared into the pool, the weight of his choice crashing over him. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Do it." She raised her hands, the pool glowing brighter, and the chamber trembled as if awakening from a long slumber. Light poured into Varan, into every pore, every nerve. Pain unlike anything he'd ever known ripped through him. He screamed, but he did not break. And when it was over, he rose, not as Varan the boy or Varan the warrior, but as the warden of the land's wrath. Back on the surface, the sickness faded. The sea softened. The black stone melted into water once more. Halgrim watched in stunned silence as his son emerged from the cliffs, no longer the unsure boy he had raised, but something else. Something the land respected. Varan walked to his father, and though his voice was calm, it was steel wrapped in truth. "This is the last raid," he said. "If you set foot on this land again, it will not be me who comes." Halgrim stared at him, then nodded without a word. They sailed away that day, and the frozen land slept once more, its wrath guarded by the boy who had dared to listen. The days passed like ripples over a still lake, each one a quiet echo of the one before. Varan remained in the northern cliffs, far from the warmth of hearth or the cheer of warriors' songs. He no longer craved either. The weight of the land's wrath settled over his shoulders like an iron cloak, and every breath he took seemed to pulse with the memory of those who had perished unjustly. He was not alone. The woman, her name was Alira, stayed close, guiding him through the sacred ruins of Vaelgard. There, beneath the frostbitten soil, lay the remnants of a civilization forgotten by all but the land itself. It was a place built not with stone, but with spirit, with memory. "Your body has changed," Alira told him as they walked along a winding corridor of blue crystal and moss-covered carvings. "The wrath doesn't only dwell in you, it shapes you. Your senses will sharpen. You'll begin to hear things others cannot. The heartbeat of trees, the sorrow of rivers." "And the dead?" Varan asked, voice low. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, them too." They came to a vast chamber where dozens of stone thrones circled a sunken platform. Upon each throne sat a figure of stone, frozen in robes, hands clasped. Statues, Varan thought at first, but no, these were once people, guardians of the land before him. Veilguard wasn't just a place of memory, Alira said. It was a covenant. Each warden before you swore an oath to defend the balance, to punish those who defy the will of the land, and protect those who honor it. And what happens if I break that oath? Alira's eyes dimmed. Then you become like them. She pointed to a crumbled throne near the far wall, its seat empty, charred, split down the center. That one broke the oath, took vengeance instead of justice, tried to use the wrath to become a god. Varan approached it slowly, placing his hand on the cold stone. What happened to him? He was unmade, by the very force he tried to control. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft weeping of the stones. As weeks passed, Varan learned to wield the wrath not as a weapon, but as a judgment. When a village burned the sacred groves to feed their fires, he arrived as a windstorm that doused their flames. When a warband slaughtered a herd of sky elk for sport, the earth beneath them gave way, and none survived. Word spread across the northern realms of the Ghost of the Cliffs, a pale warrior with eyes like frostfire who answered to no king, no god, no tribe. But not all were fearful. Some were angry. In the Southlands, beyond the Black River of Myrn, a man named Kalor had risen. A high war priest turned conqueror. Kalor had abandoned the gods in favor of something older, the Ash Depths, a blasphemous power buried deep beneath the mountains. He did not respect the land. He devoured it. And he had heard of Varan. In a temple carved into bone and basalt, Kalor stood before a throne of burning coals. A creature slithered beneath his skin, something neither alive nor truly dead. He is strong, Kalor murmured to the shadows, but even wrath has limits. The voice that answered was not human. Then we will test him. Varan stood at the mouth of a glacier when the wind changed. It carried smoke, but not the smoke of hearth fires or burning fields. This smoke was dark, unnatural, tinged with a stench of rot and sulfur. He turned to Alira. What is it? She touched the earth with her fingertips, then recoiled. Something is rising, from beneath. Something the land itself doesn't recognize. They followed the trail for days, and what they found was a village, charred to black bones, but not burned by fire, by ash. Not like your father's raids, Alira whispered. This was consumed. In the center of the ruins stood a totem of iron, scorched with symbols not seen in centuries. They spiraled and twisted, wrong to the eye, symbols that moved if stared at too long. Alira, Varan said, his voice tight, what is this? Her face was pale. This is the mark of the Hollowed One, the god who was cast out when the world was still young. Varan reached for his sword, but the wrath stirred inside him. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. This isn't just a new war, he said. This is an old one, older than me, older than you. Alira nodded, and we're already in it. The days that followed were filled with omens. Birds flew in spirals until they dropped from the sky. Rivers reversed course. The auroras over the north turned red. And then the first of Kalor's emissaries arrived. He was no man. He was hollow, skin stretched over bone, eyes glowing with emberlight. Warden of Wrath, the thing hissed, kneeling before Varan at the edge of the glacier. My master bids you speak. I have nothing to say to monsters, Varan said, his hand tightening around his blade. But the creature only laughed, a sound like knives dragged over stone. You have no idea what's coming. He remembers what even the gods forgot. He is the flame beneath the earth, the hunger in the silence. He does not burn, he consumes. What does he want? You. Varan's face darkened. Why? Because even the land you protect will surrender. And when it does, you will be all that remains. With that, the emissary threw back its head and screamed. The sound shattered ice for miles, and then its body imploded, vanishing into a heap of ash. Alira turned to Varan. fear in her eyes for the first time. This is no longer about balance. This is war. Back at Veilguard, the thrones trembled. The stone guardians stirred in their seats, murmurs rising from lips that had been still for centuries. They remembered Kalor. They remembered what he had tried to awaken once before. Varan stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by ancient judgment. "Do I still have your blessing?" he asked them. The answer came not in words, but in power. The wrath surged through him once more, sharper, wilder. He cried out as the marks of the land carved themselves into his skin, runes that pulsed with blue fire. The covenant had deepened. He was no longer just its warden, he was its champion. And the land would not fall quietly.
Like and subscribe for more.